Hey guys, we're Blender95, recording live from your local county prison cell. Wow, that intro is becoming truer and truer as times go on. And, yeah, so this is just another analysis video that I've been wanting to do. I've been saving on to this one, and actually, the more I thought about it, like, I had some reservations about it at first, but thought I might as well do it, but the more I thought about it, the more I actually like this one. So this is gonna be it's gonna be kind of interesting for me. So this is Mr. Freeze from DC Comics Batman versus Hawkmoth from Miraculous. Now, hold on, because this is another example of, I think, a thematic fight being more important than like the matchup in a lot of ways. I think this not that these two are like, not that any one person in this fight is, you know, so much more powerful than another, but the fact that, you wouldn't think these two have any in common, you'd think they would put Mr. Freeze against, like, another ice villain, which would actually just kind of piss me off, to be honest. But no, this one I think is better just because it does a lot more to the characters themselves. It does a lot more in terms of the characters themselves rather than just like, a short notes version of the character. So, for those of you who don't know, Hawkmoth from Miraculous, uh, his wife, I don't know that they ever say she was like sick or missing but they quote unquote lost. He quote unquote lost his wife, and then we find out that she's like in a tube later. So, and that's the pretty famous backstory of Mr. Freeze. So they essentially have the same sort of motive in terms of like they're trying to save or return revive their lost wives, and it actually takes them in separate directions. I mean, that's not the you could kind of take that in a different way. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, specifically they lost their wives. But anyway, let me get into the analysis anyway. So Mr. Freeze, we should all know Mr. Freeze, is very famous but very underutilized Batman villain in my opinion, just because, well, the only like movie production we ever got of him was, the infamous Arnold Schwarzenegger one, so, but I feel like they could do a lot with Mr. Freeze. The problem is just doing it multiple times is kind of difficult, because then you just kind of reduce him to a standard villain. But yeah, again, the famous story, Victor Fries, well, no, his name is Victor Freeze, it's spelled like fries. Victor Freeze, is a cryo engineer, who's trying to recover his wife, ends up being exposed to cryochemicals, and now has to live in a sub-zero environment in order to survive. So he creates a suit that not only creates this environment for him to keep him alive, but also has a lot of that cryogenic technology that he ends up using, such as the freeze ray or the freeze gun or whatever you want to call it. He has a lot of cryo grenades that he uses. And the suit also has superhuman strength, and a lot of people forget about that. He uses robotics to a degree in some incarnations, like in the animated series, he was just a living head, and the rest of his body was robotic, but I don't think we'd use that exactly. And in terms of like the suit's power output, he's been able to like he's been able to freeze like bridges, cities, not entire cities, but like sections of cities, skyscrapers. He's been able to, freeze parts of like, like the Gotham River so he has some serious like power output in terms of this suit. And like I said, it gives him superhuman strength, but it's not like Superman level or anything. It's just like enough so that it's a physical match for Batman because he wouldn't be otherwise. Um, though there is the issue that he does need a Sub-Zero environment to survive, but he's by no means like immune to ice or cold or anything. He just, you know, like is used to living in it, so like he's susceptible to his own technology. And also that suit itself is a weakness. If it were to become destroyed or damaged or anything, he would, he wouldn't be able to survive for that long. Um and he's also just like a deductive genius. He's a criminal not I don't want to say criminal genius, but he's a scientist and engineer, but he's also a brilliant master planner. To the point where, he's ended up creating plans that allow him to, he's tried to have Gotham enveloped in endless winter. He's tried to freeze the entire city solid before. So, this guy usually has the means to, but that's in a fight, that's regardless. So, now on to Hawkmoth. So, in Miraculous, specific people have these little beings with them known as Miraculous, which usually end up just giving them an attributed ability. So in addition to above human strength, speed, agility, being able to jump around like a gymnast and do all these incredible physical feats, Hawkmoth has an additional ability that makes him exceptionally dangerous, which is akumization. Now, he's able to turn these regular butterflies, which I don't know if they say he ever just keeps them or if, are they part of it, I don't know, but there's apparently a million butterflies in fucking Paris. And they would have to be part of this fight, otherwise there's no reason for this fight to happen. So, for those of you saying, like, well, why didn't they just have the fight in a place with no butterflies? Well, you have to have them be accessible for this fight to happen. You can't just, take away one character's ability, he can turn them into what he refers to as akumas, which he can send to specific targeted people and give them powers based on their emotional state. He can basically recreate the he can kind of like approximate the abilities of uh of a Miraculous and bestow them on other people. Now, that doesn't mean he's able to just create superpowers, but usually what happens is the abilities that the person gains is due to their, like I said, due to their current emotional state. And that's important because he's also very empathetic. Not like just as a human. I mean, he's literally an empath. Like he can sense specifically negative emotion. Um, and so that's how he's able to give these people their abilities. Now, when he does that, he's able to have control over the person to a degree. He can communicate with them telepathically. He can inflict harm to them wirelessly, but he can also, if need be, just completely take over their body and force them to act based off of his will. That um that in the show leads to a lot of situations where we have a lot of people running around Paris that are just uh basically slaves or unwilling pawns of Hawkmoth. And finally, as a last resort, this was actually to keep his identity safe, but he can also akumatize himself to where he adopts an alter ego known as the Collector. Now, the Collector, as well as getting the additional abilities on top of his already more impressive abilities, he also has a notebook. Well, it's like a stamp, I think it's like a notebook. I don't. It's a book. Um, to where he can seal anything inside of it, whether it be like he can seal any like physical object inside of it. I don't believe he can seal people, but he can, but like no matter the size of this object, he can just like seal it within the notebook. So, that there's also another form he has called Scarlet Moth, but that requires a completely different person's abilities, so I'm gonna discontinue that. So anyway, getting into the fight here. Now, in terms of matching abilities, like in terms of matching, let's just start with, let's say, strength, because that's the attribute that both these characters gain, I should say. So Mr. Freeze is able to become like a physical challenge for Batman. Definitely superhuman due to Batman's being peak human. So I would probably say like, yeah, it's hard to put a cap on it, but I like remotely without like looking into it. But I'd say he's probably in the several thousand pounds margin. I think that's probably fair to say. So maybe like a ton or a couple of tons or something. Now, if we look at Hawkmoth is able to physically combat both Ladybug and Cat Noir at the same time. Ladybug, Cat Noir, and a third person with Miraculous named Queen Bee were able to stop a moving train. Just with muscle, and they had their, weapons on them, but, just by using, like, pure strength. So, I'm not gonna say that he's 2/3 of that level, but he is, definitely relatable to a third of that at least, I would say, because he can definitely physically match one of them because he's been able to fight both of them off on several occasions. So I would say he definitely surpasses, I think, them individually. But even then, he's a third as strong he's as strong as somebody who is responsible for a third of the power to stop a moving train. So that, I think, puts him well above Mr. Freeze in terms of strength. In terms of ability, Freeze has a lot more power at his disposal. Being able to, like, freeze buildings and bridges and, parts of rivers and things like that. But I do think that ability is, I think, due to the, like, flexibility of Hawkmoth's powers, I think he probably has that. Not only, I mean, Mr. Freeze is known for being cold and physically and, hypothetically, or physically and metaphorically cold. But he's clearly has, grief, rage. He clearly has all these emotions. So Hawkmoth will be able to sense that and probably use that to akumatize him. And if that happens, he can just completely, shut him down in terms of taking over his mind, forcing pain upon him, doing things like that. And like I said, Freeze is by no means immune to his own technology, so it could even be like Freeze just, him just saying, okay, now pick up your freeze gun and, shoot yourself in the head with it. And then there's also the Collector we have to take into consideration because, if it came down to it, if need be, we could see Hawkmoth transform him, akumatize himself, and the Collector with that notebook being able to just like, he'd just be able to trap any ice that Freeze throws at him into that notebook, so yeah, I think that would probably, so TLDR, I think that Hawkmoth probably takes this, but I do like this fight. Not necessarily for the matchup per se, though the matchup is slightly interesting. I do think that this is a fight more so because of the type of characters they are and the story and how the characters relate to each other rather than what their abilities are. So, yeah, I think Hawkmoth takes this. But, yeah, glad I got this one out of the way, and I'm actually glad I did this one, and I'm glad I didn't address that my hand was in front of the camera the entire time. Anyway, Verbal Engine 95, see ya.